The millionaire was shocked when his little daughter ignored the 5 most beautiful girls and pointed directly at the homeless girl from the street. "I choose her as my sister, Dad." Diego Mendoza stood beside the floor-to-ceiling windows of his Manhattan penthouse, watching the city pulse with life 30 floors below. At 32, he had everything money could buy, except the one thing that mattered most. His wife, Clara, had passed away 3 years ago, leaving him to raise their 7-year-old daughter, Isabella, alone. "Dad!" Isabella's soft voice pulled him from his thoughts. She stood in the doorway, hugging her favorite stuffed elephant, her blonde curls catching the morning light. "Are you still sad?" Diego knelt down, drawing his daughter to him. Isabella had been asking the same question for months, ever since she'd started asking about having a sister. "I'm not sad when I'm with you, sweetheart, but I want a sister, Dad, someone to play with when you're working." Her blue eyes, so much like Clara's, looked at him with that determined expression he knew well. Diego had spent weeks consulting with child psychologists, adoption agencies, and family counselors. The decision wasn't easy, but Isabella's loneliness was breaking his heart. Finally, he had agreed to an unconventional approach, allowing Isabella to help choose her future sister from a carefully selected group of children who needed homes. "Remember what we talked about, Isa? Today we're going to meet 5 very special girls who need families. You'll help me choose which one becomes your sister." Isabella nodded solemnly. "The pretty ones you showed me in the photos." "That's right. My assistant, Patricia, spent months finding the most wonderful girls in New York." Diego had requested that the candidates be selected not only for their need for homes, but for their potential to fit into his world. Well-educated girls with good manners who could adapt to his lifestyle. As they prepared to leave for the first meeting, Isabella suddenly stopped in the entrance of their building's lobby. Through the glass doors, Diego could see a small figure huddled near the exclusive condominium complex door. It was a girl, maybe 8 or 9 years old, with tangled dark hair and clothes that had seen better days. She held a cardboard sign, her eyes fixed on the ground. "Dad, who is that girl?" "Just someone asking for help, sweetheart. Let's go." But Isabella pressed her face against the glass, studying the girl intently. Something flickered in her expression. Recognition, perhaps, but that was impossible. Isabella had never been outside her protected world alone. "She's always there," Isabella whispered. Diego stopped. Always there? How would Isabella know that? He made a mental note to ask his doorman about increasing security, but now they had appointments to keep. As their black sedan pulled away, Diego saw Isabella looking back at the girl once more. In that moment, he couldn't shake the feeling that his carefully planned day was about to take an unexpected turn. Little did he know that by nightfall, everything he thought he knew about decisions, family, and his own daughter would be turned completely upside down. The meeting, the private office of the Mendoza Foundation, occupied the entire 42nd floor of the Chrysler Building, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking view of Manhattan. Patricia Hernandez, Diego's longtime assistant and closest confidant, had transformed the main conference room into something that felt more like an elegant living room than a business meeting space. Soft, classical music played in the background. Fresh flowers adorned every surface, and comfortable seating areas had been arranged to make the children feel at ease. Diego nervously adjusted his tie as he and Isabella entered the room. 5 carefully selected girls sat with their respective social workers, each impeccably dressed and serene beyond their years. These weren't just any children from the system. Patricia had spent 3 months identifying candidates who would integrate seamlessly into his world of private schools, charity galas, and international travel. "Mr. Mendoza, Isabella, welcome," said Patricia, her voice loaded with the warmth that had made her indispensable for the past 8 years. "I'd like you to meet our exceptional young ladies." Isabella clung to her father's hand, her small fingers trembling slightly. Despite all their preparation and conversations, the reality of choosing a sister felt overwhelming. "First, we have Sofia Torres, 8 years old, from the prestigious Riverside Academy," Patricia began. gesturing toward a girl with perfectly styled brown hair and emerald eyes. Sophia speaks French, Spanish, and Mandarin fluently and has been playing violin since she was 4. Sophia stood gracefully, her posture perfect, offering a small curtsy that would have impressed European royalty. "Bonjour, Mr. Mendoza," she said, then seamlessly switched to Spanish. "It's a great pleasure to meet you both." Diego carefully watched Isabella's reaction. His daughter nodded politely, but her enthusiasm seemed forced, mechanical. Next is Valeria Castillo, also 8 years old, from St. Catherine's Home for Exceptional Children, Patricia continued. Valeria has been studying ballet in the American Ballet Theater's children's program and maintains a 4.0 average in accelerated academics. Valeria stood and performed a perfect pirouette, her movements fluid and graceful, followed by a series of complex ballet positions that earned murmurs of appreciation from the adults in the room. "That was beautiful," Isabella whispered. But Diego noticed she seemed more impressed than emotionally connected. The presentations continued methodically. Gracia Morales, a 9-year-old artistic prodigy whose paintings had already been exhibited in several Manhattan galleries. Her portfolio showed works that rivaled those of artists twice her age. Rebecca Chang, 8 years old, who spoke 5 languages and had already been accepted into Columbia University's Youth Enrichment Program. And finally, Carolina Herrera, a 7-year-old piano virtuoso who had performed at Carnegie Hall. Carolina's fingers danced across the portable keyboard Patricia had provided, playing a complex Chopin piece with the skill of an experienced concert pianist. The melody filled the room, beautifully moving and technically flawless. Each girl was remarkable in her own right, exactly what Diego had envisioned for Isabella's sister. They were intelligent, cultured, talented, and would fit perfectly into his world without requiring any major adjustments to his lifestyle or social circle. "Well, Isabella," Diego asked gently, kneeling beside his daughter, "what do you think? Would you like to spend individual time with any of these wonderful girls?" Isabella looked at each candidate carefully, her blue eyes serious and thoughtful. Her small hands were folded neatly in her lap, a gesture she had learned by watching her mother at formal events. "They're all very nice, Dad," she said quietly, but Diego could hear the hesitation in her voice. "But," he prompted, knowing his daughter well enough to sense there was more. "Can we go home now? I want to think about it," Isabella said, not meeting his eyes. Patricia looked genuinely surprised. They had planned for Isabella to make her initial choice today with legal documentation ready to begin the adoption process immediately. The timeline had been carefully orchestrated to minimize disruption for everyone involved. "Of course, sweetheart," Diego said, though he felt a knot of worry forming in his stomach. "We don't have to decide anything today." D'Apiefata Sur, the encounter. As their black sedan navigated through Manhattan's busy streets toward home, Isabella pressed her face against the tinted window, her breath fogging the glass as she scanned the sidewalks intently. When they approached their building, she sat up straighter, her whole body tense with anticipation. "Dad, stop the car," she said urgently. "What's wrong, Isa?" "I want to talk to that girl, the one with the sign." Diego felt his heart sink. "Isabella, that's not... We can't just approach strangers on the street. It's not safe. Please, Dad, just for a minute, I promise I'll be careful." Against every instinct he possessed, Diego instructed his driver to stop. The girl looked up as they approached, her dark eyes tired but undeniably intelligent. Up close, Diego could see she was probably 8 or 9 years old, with an alertness in her gaze that her desperate circumstances couldn't diminish. "What's your name?" Isabella asked, stepping closer than Diego felt comfortable with, but he found himself unable to intervene. "Lucia," the girl whispered, clutching her cardboard sign tighter. "I'm Isabella. Are you hungry, Lucia?" Lucia nodded, and in that moment, something passed between the two girls that Diego couldn't fully understand. A recognition, a connection that transcended their vastly different circumstances. Breathe the revelation. That night, Isabella sat at their formal dining table, barely touching the gourmet meal their private chef had prepared. Diego watched his daughter push her grilled salmon around her porcelain plate, her mind clearly miles away from their elegant penthouse dining room with its crystal chandelier and original Monet hanging on the wall. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the soft classical music that always played during dinner and the distant sounds of the city far below. This had become their routine since Clara's death. Silent, polite meals that felt more like business meetings than family time. "Isa, talk to me," Diego finally said, setting down his fork. "What bothers you about those girls today? They were all wonderful, talented, exactly the kind of sister I thought you wanted." Isabella looked at him with those serious blue eyes that reminded him so painfully of Clara. She seemed to be weighing her words carefully, as if what she was about to say would change everything between them. "Dad, can I tell you a secret? A really big secret I've been keeping?" "Of course, sweetheart. You know you can tell me anything," Diego said, though something in her tone made him suddenly nervous. Sometimes when you're working late in your office, I sneak out to the garden at night." Diego felt his blood freeze. His penthouse had a private rooftop garden accessible through the master bedroom suite, but the thought of Isabella wandering alone at night, 30 floors above the street, terrified him beyond reason. "Isabella, that's very dangerous. The garden isn't lit at night. And if you fell..." He couldn't finish the sentence. "Why didn't you tell me? Why have you been going out alone?" "Because I wanted to see the stars, like Mommy used to show me before she got sick," Isabella said, her voice small but determined. "Remember how she used to take me up there and point out all the constellations? She said the stars were angels watching over us." Diego's throat tightened. He had completely avoided the garden since Clara's death, unable to face the memories it contained. "And from up there," Isabella continued, "I can see down to the street very clearly. I can see all the way to the park and the bus stops and everything." She paused, fidgeting with her linen napkin, clearly steeling herself to continue. "I've been watching Lucia for weeks, Dad. She doesn't just ask for money during the day. At night she sleeps on that bench in front of our building, the one by the fountain. She has nightmares and cries sometimes, and she talks to herself when she thinks no one can hear her." Diego felt his heart breaking as he realized how much his daughter had been watching, how much pain she had been witnessing while he had been buried in his work, trying to lose himself in business deals and board meetings. "And there's something else," Isabella continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Lucia talks to herself sometimes, but she's not really talking to herself, Dad. She's talking to someone who isn't there, someone she misses terribly." "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "She says things like, 'Yes, Mommy, I'm being brave, and I promise, Mommy, I won't forget what you taught me, and, Mommy, I found her just like you said I would.' She talks exactly like I talk to Mommy in my dreams." The realization hit Diego like a physical blow, stealing his breath. Isabella had been watching this homeless girl grieve, watching her process loss and abandonment. And in Lucia, she had recognized a kindred spirit going through the same devastating experience. "Isabella," he said carefully, "is that why you want Lucia to be your sister? Because you both lost your mothers?" Isabella nodded, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. "She needs us, Dad. She really, really needs us. And I think Mommy would want us to help her. Mommy always said we should help people who are suffering." Diego drew his daughter close, his own eyes filling with tears, realizing the incredible burden Isabella had been carrying. While he had been focused on keeping their world controlled and protected, his 7-year-old daughter had been wrestling with complex emotions and moral obligations that would challenge most adults. "Let me make some calls," he whispered into her hair, knowing that what she was asking for was complicated, potentially dangerous, and completely outside the realm of possibility. But as he held Isabella, feeling her small body tremble with suppressed sobs, Diego realized that his carefully controlled world was about to face its greatest challenge. What Diego didn't know was that Lucia's story was much more complicated and connected to their lives than anyone could imagine. Into the investigation. The next morning, Diego sat in his mahogany-paneled office on the 58th floor of Mendoza Industries building, making phone calls that would normally be unthinkable for someone in his position. The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across his antique Persian rug. But Diego barely noticed the spectacular view of Central Park spread below. His first call was to Detective Miguel Torres, an old Harvard friend who now worked with the NYPD's Missing Persons Unit. They had maintained their friendship over the years, despite their vastly different careers, bonding over their shared love of baseball and their experience as single fathers. "Miguel, I need a favor, and I know how this is going to sound," Diego began, pacing behind his desk. "Let me guess. You're calling about a woman and it's complicated." Torres laughed. "What's her name?" "It's not a woman, it's a girl, a homeless girl, maybe 8 or 9 years old. First name Lucia. No last name that I know of. She's been living on the streets near my building." The silence on the other end of the line was telling. "Diego, you're asking me to investigate a homeless girl with no identification? That's not exactly standard procedure, and it's definitely not something I can do as a favor for a friend. Miguel, my daughter wants to adopt this girl. I need to know if it's safe for her to be around Isabella. Is she a runaway? Are there family members looking for her? Has she been involved in anything dangerous? I can't just ignore this, but I also can't put my daughter at risk." Torres sighed deeply. "Diego, this is opening a can of worms you might not want to deal with. Sometimes these kids are on the streets for reasons you don't want to discover. Sometimes they're running from things that are worse than homelessness. I understand the risks, but I have to know. Isabella is convinced this girl needs our help, and you know how perceptive Isabella has been since Clara died. She sees things adults overlook." "Okay," Torres said reluctantly. "Let me ask around discreetly. I'll check with the runaway task force. I'll see if anyone matching her description has been reported missing. But Diego, if this goes wrong, if this girl is connected to something dangerous, I know. I'll handle whatever comes up." Diego's second call was to Dr. Amanda Foster, the child psychologist who had been helping him and Isabella process their grief for the past year. Dr. Foster had been recommended by Mount Sinai's pediatric psychology department, and her sessions with Isabella had been invaluable in helping his daughter cope with losing her mother. "Dr. Foster, I need your professional opinion on something. Speaking hypothetically, what would you think about Isabella forming an attachment to a homeless girl she's been watching from a distance?" "Mr. Mendoza, that's quite a specific question to be hypothetical," Dr. Foster said with a slight laugh. "But to answer your question, children often project their own emotional needs onto others they perceive as helpless or vulnerable. Isabella may see herself in this girl's situation. They've both experienced loss. They're both dealing with feelings of powerlessness and abandonment in different ways. So her desire to help could be healthy. It could be extremely healthy, actually. It could represent Isabella taking control of her grief by channeling it into positive action, or it could be Isabella trying to save herself by saving someone else, which could lead to disappointment and additional trauma if the situation doesn't turn out as she expects." Dr. Foster paused thoughtfully. "Without knowing this girl, I can't make a definitive assessment, but Diego, Isabella's instincts about people have been remarkably accurate since her mother's death. Grief can heighten children's emotional intelligence and their ability to recognize pain in others." The observation. That afternoon, Diego did something he hadn't done in years. He walked the streets around his building instead of being driven everywhere in his armored sedan. He wanted to observe Lucia without her knowing to understand what Isabella had been seeing from her rooftop garden night after night. He found her at Thompson Square Park, 2 blocks from his building, sitting alone on a swing that had seen better days. She was moving slowly back and forth, her feet barely touching the ground. She was cleaner than she had been the day before, and Diego wondered where she had managed to wash and change clothes. As he watched from behind a large oak tree, Lucia pulled out a small, worn photograph from her jacket pocket. The photo was obviously precious to her. She handled it with extreme care, as if it might disintegrate at any moment. She looked at it for a long moment, then pressed it against her chest and closed her eyes. "Mommy, I'm trying to be brave like you taught me," she whispered, and Diego felt his heart break a little. "I found her, Mommy, the brave girl you told me about, but I don't know how to talk to her without scaring her daddy." Diego felt his breath catch. How could Lucia know about Isabella? How could she possibly know anything about his family? But then something even stranger happened. Lucia looked up from her photograph directly toward the building where Diego lived, scanning the upper floors until her gaze settled on the penthouse level. She waved slightly, as if she could see someone waving back. Diego turned to look toward his building and felt his pulse quicken. There, barely visible on the rooftop garden, was a small figure silhouetted against the sky. Isabella was there, waving back. The realization hit him like lightning. This wasn't one-sided observation. Both girls had been watching each other, communicating across an impossible distance, forming a connection that transcended their different worlds. How long had this been going on? And more importantly, what did Lucia know about his family that she shouldn't know? The devastating truth. Detective Torres called Diego that night with news that made everything infinitely more complicated. Diego was in his study, trying to focus on quarterly reports, when his phone rang with the distinctive tone he had assigned to Miguel's number. "Diego, you need to sit down for this," Torres said without preamble. "Lucia Morales, 8 years old, disappeared from foster care 6 months ago. Her social worker assumed she was just another runaway statistic. But here's where it gets interesting. She was placed in care after her mother died in a car accident last winter." Diego felt his pulse quicken. The timing was significant. Clara had died little over a year ago, which meant both girls had lost their mothers within months of each other. "Tell me about the mother," Diego said, reaching for a legal pad to take notes. "Dr. Elena Morales, 34 years old, pediatric surgeon at Mount Sinai Hospital. She was driving home from the hospital during that massive snowstorm we had in February, when she lost control of her car on the FDR drive. She was working a double shift, hadn't slept in over 24 hours. Diego felt a chill run down his spine. Mount Sinai was where Clara had received her cancer treatments. What happened to Lucia after her mother died? "Here's where it gets ugly," Torres continued. "Lucia was supposed to go to her aunt in California, but the aunt never showed up to claim her. Turned out the aunt had a record for drug possession and domestic violence. Child Protective Services wouldn't approve the placement, so she went into foster care. Worse, she was placed with the Hernandez family in Queens. And Diego, this family has been investigated multiple times for neglect and emotional abuse. They take kids for the monthly payments, but they don't actually care for them. Lucia disappeared from their home 3 months ago, and honestly, no one tried very hard to find her. The pieces were starting to fit together for Diego. A doctor's daughter would be intelligent, articulate, well-educated, despite her current circumstances. But there was still something that didn't make sense. "Miguel, I need you to do me one more favor, and this is important. Can you find out if Dr. Elena Morales ever had any connection to Mount Sinai's oncology department? Specifically, if she ever treated patients in the pediatric oncology ward?" The silence on the other end of the line stretched for what felt like an eternity. "Diego, why would you ask that specific question? Just please check it for me. I have a feeling all of this is connected somehow." 2 hours later, Torres called back with information that made Diego's hands shake as he gripped the phone. "Diego, Dr. Elena Morales wasn't just connected to the pediatric oncology ward. She was Clara's surgeon. She performed the operation that removed Clara's tumor and gave her those extra 3 months with Isabella." The room seemed to spin around Diego. The coincidence was impossible, but the facts were undeniable. "There's more," Torres continued, his voice gentle now as he realized the emotional impact of what he was revealing. "I spoke with some nurses who worked with Dr. Morales. They said she used to talk about her cases, particularly one little girl in the pediatric ward who was so brave during her mother's treatment that it inspired Elena to push harder, to try experimental procedures she might not have attempted otherwise. Isabella, Diego whispered. Elena Morales knew your daughter, Diego. She talked about Isabella constantly, said that watching Isabella's courage during Clara's treatment reminded her why she had become a doctor in the first place. And if Lucia heard her mother's stories about the incredibly brave little girl who lived in the elegant building across from the hospital, Diego's mind reeled as the full picture came into focus. Lucia wasn't camping near his building by coincidence. She was there because her mother had told her about Isabella, had probably described their building, had shared stories about the little girl who never cried, even when her mother was dying. Diego, there's something else you need to know, Torres said carefully. Lucia's case file mentions selective mutism induced by trauma after her mother's death. She hasn't spoken to any adults in the system since the accident, but neighbors at the Hernandez house reported seeing her talking to herself frequently, usually while looking at a photograph. She talks to her mother's photo, Diego said, remembering what Isabella had told him. That's not all. The neighbors also reported that Lucia would stand at the window of her foster home and stare toward Manhattan for hours. Diego, I think this girl has been looking for Isabella since her mother died. The magnitude of what Torres was revealing hit Diego like a tsunami. Both girls had been grieving, both had been searching for connection, and somehow, across the vast expanse of New York City, they had found each other. But why hadn't Lucia approached them directly? Why was she living on the streets instead of asking for help? As if reading his thoughts, Torres provided the final piece of the puzzle. Diego, after what Lucia went through with the Hernandez family, she doesn't trust adults anymore, but she still believed in her mother's stories about the brave little girl. I think she's been trying to find a way to connect with Isabella without involving any adults. Now the picture was complete, and Diego realized that both girls had been carrying an incredible burden of grief and hope, waiting for the right moment to reach out to each other. The conversation under the stars. That night, Diego climbed the stairs to the rooftop garden for the first time since Clara's death. He found Isabella there, wrapped in one of Clara's cashmere blankets, sitting on the stone bench where she used to read bedtime stories under the stars. The city glittered below them like a galaxy, and Central Park stretched in the distance like a dark oasis. Isabella, we need to talk about Lucia, Diego said, settling beside his daughter on the bench. Isabella turned toward him with eyes that seemed to contain the wisdom of someone much older than her 7 years. In the moonlight, she looked so much like Clara that Diego felt his breath catch. You found out about her mommy, didn't you? She said simply. Diego felt his world tilt on its axis. What do you know about Lucia's mother? Everything, Isabella said, her voice barely above a whisper. Lucia told me everything about her. Her mommy was Dr. Elena, and she was an angel who helped sick people get better. She worked at the same hospital where we took Mommy for her treatments. Isabella paused, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders as a cool breeze swept across the rooftop. Lucia said her mommy used to tell her stories about her patients, especially about one little girl who was so brave that it made her mommy want to work harder to save people. She said her mommy called this little girl the brave angel who lived in a castle in the sky and never cried even when her mommy was very sick. Tears began to run down Isabella's face as she continued. Dad, Lucia's mommy told her about me. She described our building, our garden, even the way I used to wave from up here when we went to the hospital. Dr. Elena was Mommy's doctor, wasn't she? Diego could barely speak through his own tears. How long have you known? Since the first night I saw her down there, Isabella said, pointing toward the street below. She was crying and holding a photo, and I heard her say, Mommy, I found the brave girl from your stories. But I don't know how to talk to her without her daddy sending me away. And I knew, Dad. I knew her mommy was the doctor who gave us those extra months with Mommy before she went to heaven. The weight of the revelation settled over Diego like a heavy blanket. Lucia hadn't been placed near their building by coincidence or even by her own random choice. In her grief and trauma, she had sought out the only connection she had left to her mother. The story of the brave little girl her mother had admired and talked about constantly. "Isabella, why didn't you tell me before? Why have you been carrying this secret alone?" "Because I was scared," Isabella admitted, her voice breaking. "I was scared you'd call the police and they'd take her away before I could help her. Lucia's mommy saved our mommy, Dad. She gave us more time together. Now we have to save Lucia." Diego looked at his daughter, realizing that while he had been drowning in his own grief and trying to control every aspect of their protected world, Isabella had been living with this enormous knowledge, carrying this sense of responsibility and moral obligation on her small shoulders. "The other girls today, the ones Patricia chose, they're very nice, Dad, and they're smart and talented," Isabella said. "But they don't need us like Lucia needs us. They'll find good families who can give them everything they want. But Lucia only has us. And I don't need a sister who's perfect, Dad. I need a sister who understands what it's like to lose your mommy and still have to be brave every day." Diego felt his heart break and heal at the same time as he understood the depth of his daughter's compassion and wisdom. Isabella's choice wasn't about wanting a sister, or even about honoring a debt to Dr. Morales. It was about recognizing that sometimes the people who need us most aren't the ones who look perfect on paper, but the ones who share our deepest wounds and can help us heal together. "Lucia has been living on the streets for months, sweetheart. She's probably scared, possibly traumatized, definitely needs medical care and psychological support." "I know," Isabella said firmly, "but she's also the strongest person I've ever seen except for Mommy. And Dad, when I talk to her from up here, when she waves back at me, I don't feel so alone anymore." Diego held his daughter under the stars that Clara used to point out to them, realizing that bringing Lucia into their world wouldn't just be about saving her, it would be about saving all of them. But as the city hummed with life far below them, Diego couldn't shake the feeling that this decision would unleash consequences none of them were prepared for, and that his carefully controlled world was about to become something completely unpredictable. The decision. The next morning, Diego made a decision that would have seemed impossible just a week before. He called Patricia to his office and instructed her to cancel all meetings for the day, then contacted the most expensive family law attorney in the city, Margarita Chen, whose firm specialized in high-profile adoptions and custody cases. "Ms. Chen, I need to adopt a girl who is currently classified as a runaway from the foster system. I need this done quickly, correctly, and without media attention." Margarita Chen had handled adoptions for celebrities, politicians, and multimillionaires, but even she seemed surprised by the request. "Mr. Mendoza, adopting a runaway is extraordinarily complex. The girl would have to be returned to state custody first, then go through the standard evaluation process. We're talking about months, possibly years." "I don't have years," Diego said firmly. "This girl has been living on the streets because the foster system failed her. Every day she's out there, she's in danger. I understand your concern, but there are protocols. Child services will want extensive background checks, home studies, psychological evaluations for both you and Isabella. They'll question why you're choosing this particular girl over the thousands of others in the system." Diego spent the morning making calls to everyone he knew in city government, leveraging relationships built over years of charitable donations and political contributions. By noon, he had managed to arrange an emergency meeting with the head of Child Protective Services. Meanwhile, Isabella had convinced their building's security to allow her to visit Lucia in the park. Diego found them sitting together on the swing, Isabella gently combing Lucia's tangled hair with a small brush she had brought from home. "Lucia, this is my dad," Isabella said as Diego approached. "Dad, Lucia wants to tell you something important." Lucia looked at Diego with those intelligent dark eyes, and for the first time she spoke directly to an adult. Thank you for being kind to me, Mr. Mendoza. My mommy told me that Isabella's daddy was a good man who loved his family very much. Diego knelt to Lucia's eye level, his heart breaking at the trust he saw in her face. Lucia, would you like to come home with us? Isabella and I want you to be part of our family. Tears filled Lucia's eyes as she nodded, but then her expression grew worried. But what if the bad people come looking for me? What if they try to take me back to the bad house? What bad people? Diego asked gently. Isabella squeezed Lucia's hand encouragingly. Tell him about the Hernandez family. Lucia's voice became barely a whisper. Mr. and Mrs. Hernandez said I was worthless, that nobody would ever want me because my mommy was dead. They locked me in my room when I cried and took away my mommy's picture. Diego felt rage building in his chest, but kept his voice calm and reassuring. Lucia, those people will never hurt you again, I promise you. Drizul, the legal battle. That afternoon, Diego sat in the sterile offices of Child Protective Services with Margarita Chen, facing a bureaucracy that seemed designed to prevent rather than facilitate adoptions. The social worker assigned to Lucia's case, a tired-looking woman named Janet Rodriguez, leafed through papers with obvious reluctance. Mr. Mendoza, I appreciate your willingness to help, but Lucia Morales is considered a flight risk. She's run away twice now, and we have concerns about her psychological state. She ran away from an abusive home, Diego said, fighting to keep his temper under control. Have you investigated the Hernandez family? The Hernandez family has been cleared of any wrongdoing, Rodriguez replied curtly. Lucia's claims could not be substantiated. Margarita Chen leaned forward. Ms. Rodriguez, my client is prepared to provide Lucia with the best possible care, private tutoring, therapy, medical care, everything she needs to recover from her trauma. The system doesn't work that way, Rodriguez said. Lucia needs to be returned to approved foster care, while the adoption process proceeds through the appropriate channels. Absolutely not, Diego said, standing up. I will not allow that child to be put back in a situation where she could be hurt. Then I'm afraid there's nothing more we can do today, Rodriguez said, closing Lucia's file with finality. As they left the building, Margarita Chen put a hand on Diego's arm. There's another way, but it's risky. We could petition for emergency custody based on Lucia's medical and psychological needs. If we can prove that returning her to foster care would cause immediate harm, do it, Diego said without hesitation. Whatever it takes. That night, as Isabella and Lucia sat together in the penthouse living room, sharing dinner and watching a movie, Diego made another call to Detective Torres. Miguel, I need everything you can find on Roberto and Susana Hernandez. Every complaint, every investigation, every piece of paper that exists on them. Diego, what are you planning? I'm going to make sure Lucia never has to go back there. And if that means exposing the failures of the foster system, then that's what I'll do. As he watched Isabella and Lucia laughing together on the couch, Diego realized he was no longer just trying to give Isabella a sister. He was fighting for both girls' futures, and he wasn't going to lose this battle. The first night, Lucia's first night in the Mendoza penthouse, was anything but peaceful. Diego had arranged for her to have the guest bedroom next to Isabella's room, complete with new clothes, toys, and everything a little girl could need. But luxury couldn't erase months of trauma and fear. At 2 a.m., Diego was awakened by Isabella shaking his shoulder. Dad, Lucia is having a nightmare and won't wake up. Diego rushed to the guest room to find Lucia thrashing in her bed, tears streaming down her face as she called out for her mother. When he tried to gently wake her, she recoiled in terror, cowering against the headboard. Don't hurt me, she whispered. I'll be good. I promise I'll be good. Isabella climbed onto the bed and took Lucia's hands. Lucia, it's me, Isabella. You're safe now. You're in our house, remember? Slowly, Lucia's eyes focused, and she recognized where she was, but the fear didn't completely leave her face. I'm sorry, she whispered. I didn't mean to make noise. Please don't send me away. Diego felt his heart break again. Lucia, sweetheart, you're not going anywhere. This is your home now. The next few days were a careful dance of adjustment. Lucia was polite to a fault, barely eating, afraid to touch anything in case she broke something valuable. She would ask permission before sitting down, before speaking, before going to the bathroom even. Dr. Foster came to the house for an evaluation, and her assessment was sobering. Lucia is exhibiting classic signs of complex trauma and attachment disorder. She's been conditioned to believe that her worth depends on being invisible and not causing problems. How do we help her? Diego asked. Time, patience, and consistency. She needs to learn that she's valued for who she is, not for how little space she takes up in the world. Isabella, meanwhile, became Lucia's fierce protector and interpreter. She seemed to instinctively understand what Lucia needed, whether it was space to be alone or gentle encouragement to try something new. Lucia hasn't played with toys in a long time, Isabella explained to Diego one night. She told me the Hernandez family said toys were for good kids, and she was never good enough. Diego watched as Isabella patiently showed Lucia how to use the TV remote, how to ask the kitchen staff for snacks, how to use the intercom system to call for help if she needed anything. But the real breakthrough came on the fourth day, when Lucia finally asked for something she wanted. "Mr. Mendoza," she said quietly, finding Diego in his study. Could I maybe call you something else? Mr. Mendoza sounds like the mean teachers at school. What would you like to call me? Diego asked, looking up from his laptop. Isabella calls you Dad, but I don't know if I'm allowed. Diego left his work completely and knelt to Lucia's level. Lucia, you can call me whatever makes you feel comfortable. If you want to call me Dad, that would make me very happy. But if that doesn't feel right yet, that's okay too. Lucia considered this seriously. Could I call you Daddy Diego, like both names together? I would love that, Diego said, and he meant it completely. That night at dinner, Lucia ate a full meal for the first time since she'd arrived. She even asked for seconds of the chef's famous chocolate cake, then immediately looked terrified that she'd been too greedy. Lucia, Isabella said, as if it were obvious. We have like a whole kitchen full of food. You can eat as much as you want. That's what families do. Really? Lucia asked. Really, Diego confirmed. In fact, tomorrow we're going to take you shopping for clothes and books and anything else you need. Lucia's eyes lit up with excitement, then dimmed with worry. But what if the social worker comes and says I have to go back? What if she says I'm not supposed to have nice things? Diego and Isabella exchanged a look. They hadn't told Lucia about the legal battle still raging over her custody. They hadn't wanted to worry her with adult problems. Lucia, Diego said carefully, I want you to know that I'm working very hard to make sure you can stay with us forever. But even if some adults try to say you have to leave, Isabella and I will never stop fighting for you. That night, for the first time since she'd arrived, Lucia didn't have nightmares. Instead, Diego found both girls asleep in Isabella's bed, holding hands with Lucia's precious photograph of her mother tucked safely between them on the pillow. But outside, in the shadows across the street, a dark sedan had been parked for hours, its occupants watching the building with intense interest. The legal battle for Lucia was about to become much more complicated. The threat. The call came at 7 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. Margarita Chen's voice was tense with urgency as she spoke to Diego over the phone. Diego, we have a problem. Roberto Hernandez is claiming that Lucia stole money from him before she ran away. He's filed a police report and is demanding that she be returned to his custody immediately. Diego felt his blood turn to ice. That's impossible. Lucia is 8 years old and has been living on the streets for months. I know it's ridiculous, but Hernandez has some kind of evidence. Bank statements showing cash withdrawals that supposedly match money missing from his house. He's claiming that Lucia has behavioral problems that make her unsuitable for adoption. Diego looked across the breakfast table where Lucia and Isabella were sharing pancakes and laughing over a comic book. Lucia had finally started to smile, to act like the child she was supposed to be. What does this mean for us? It means Child Protective Services is reopening Lucia's case. They want to interview her, and Hernandez is demanding the right to see her as her legal guardian. "Over my dead body," Diego said categorically. After hanging up, Diego struggled with how much to tell the girls. He decided to be honest but gentle, taking them both aside in the living room. "Girls, I need to tell you something important. Some people are trying to say that Lucia has to go back to her old foster home." Lucia's face went white with terror. "No," she whispered. "Please, Daddy Diego, don't let them take me back. I'll be really good, I promise." Isabella grabbed Lucia's hand fiercely. "Nobody is taking you anywhere. Tell her, Dad." "I'm going to fight this with everything I have," Diego said firmly. "But Lucia, lawyers might need to ask you some questions about what happened at the Hernandez house. Are you brave enough to tell them the truth?" Lucia nodded, though her hands were shaking. "Mr. Hernandez was mean to all the kids. He made us work in the basement, cleaning things and sorting things for his business, and Mrs. Hernandez said if we told anyone, they'd put us in juvenile detention, where even worse things would happen." Diego felt his stomach turn. "What kind of work, sweetheart?" "Cleaning electronics, taking apart phones and computers. He said we had to remove all the important parts and put them in different boxes. I didn't understand why, but the older kids said he was selling the parts to people who weren't supposed to have them." Diego exchanged a meaningful look with Isabella, who was old enough to understand the implications. Hernandez wasn't just abusing children, he was running some kind of illegal operation, using them as unpaid labor. "Lucia, the money Mr. Hernandez says you stole. Do you know anything about that?" "I never took any money," Lucia said, tears starting to flow. But the night before I ran away, I heard Mr. Hernandez talking on the phone about how someone had stolen from him. He was really angry, yelling about how he was going to make the kids pay for it." "Who else was in the house when you left?" "Tommy was still there, and Sarah and the new boy whose name I never knew. Tommy was really scared because Mr. Hernandez had been blaming him for things all week." Diego realized that Lucia might have been framed for Hernandez's missing money to cover up his illegal activities or to deflect attention from his real financial problems. That afternoon, Detective Torres came to the penthouse with news that changed everything. "Diego, I did some digging on Roberto Hernandez like you asked. This guy has been under FBI investigation for months. They think he's been running a stolen electronics operation using foster kids as free labor to strip valuable components. Can we use this to protect Lucia?" "It gets better. Hernandez's bank records show large cash deposits that don't match his reported income. The money he claims Lucia stole never existed. He's been cooking his books to hide illegal income." Diego felt a surge of hope. So Lucia is innocent. More than that, she's a potential witness in a federal case. The FBI has been looking for someone who can testify about Hernandez's operation, if Lucia is willing to talk to them. She's 8 years old, Miguel. She's been through enough trauma already. "I know, but Diego, this might be the only way to ensure that Hernandez can never get custody of her again. If he's facing federal charges, CPS will have to reconsider his fitness as a foster parent." That night, Diego sat with both girls in Isabella's room, explaining the situation as simply as he could. "Lucia, some very important police officers want to ask you about Mr. Hernandez's business. You'd be helping to make sure he can never hurt other kids the way he hurt you." Lucia was silent for a long time, looking at her mother's photograph that she still carried everywhere. "My mommy always said that when you know something is wrong, you have to be brave enough to tell the truth, even when it's scary." She looked up at Diego with determination in her eyes. "I want to help stop him. Other kids shouldn't have to be scared like I was." Isabella squeezed her sister's hand. "We'll be with you the whole time." Diego felt overwhelming pride at both girls' courage, but he also knew the real battle was just beginning. Hernandez wouldn't go down without a fight, and there was no way to know what other secrets might come to light in the process. To the FBI interview. The FBI interview was scheduled for the following Monday at a child-friendly facility designed specifically for young witnesses. Diego, Isabella, and Dr. Foster accompanied Lucia, who clutched her mother's photograph and a small stuffed elephant that Isabella had given her for courage. Special Agent Sarah Martinez had years of experience interviewing child witnesses, and she made Lucia feel as comfortable as possible in the bright, cheerful room filled with toys and comfortable seating. "Lucia, you're very brave for coming here today," Agent Martinez said gently. "I just want you to tell me about your time with the Hernandez family. Take your time and remember that you're safe now." Lucia spoke quietly but clearly about the long hours in the basement, the electronics they were forced to dismantle, the threats about what would happen if they told anyone. Her testimony was devastating in its simplicity and honesty. But then Agent Martinez asked a question that changed everything. "Lucia, did you ever see Mr. Hernandez meeting with other adults, people who came to pick up the boxes of electronics parts?" Lucia nodded. "There was a man who came a lot. He was always really nice to me, which was weird because most of the adults were mean in that house. Can you describe him?" "He was tall and had gray hair, and he wore really expensive suits like the ones Daddy Diego wears. He always asked about me specifically, like he knew who I was." Diego felt a chill run down his spine. "Did he ever say anything to you directly?" "Just once," Lucia said, her voice becoming thoughtful. "He said I looked just like my mommy, and that my mommy had been a very special doctor who helped his family once. He said he was sorry about what happened to her." Agent Martinez leaned forward with interest. "Did he tell you his name?" "Mr. Hernandez called him Mr. M. something. I couldn't hear the whole name." Diego's blood turned to ice as the pieces fell into place. He excused himself from the room and immediately called Margarita Chen. "Margarita, I need you to run a background check on someone. Cross-reference any business dealings between Mendoza Industries and Roberto Hernandez or any electronics company he might be connected to." 30 minutes later, Margarita called back with information that made Diego's world collapse. "Diego, sit down. Mendoza Industries has been purchasing recycled electronics components from a company called Metro Electronics Recycling for the past 2 years. The contracts were negotiated by your uncle Ricardo. Ricardo Mendoza, Diego's uncle and former CEO of Mendoza Industries, had been like a father to Diego after his parents died. Diego had trusted him completely, never questioning the business decisions Ricardo had made before retiring. Margarita, are you saying my uncle has been knowingly buying stolen electronics from Hernandez? It's worse than that. I found email correspondence between Ricardo and Hernandez going back 18 months. Ricardo knew exactly where those components were coming from and knew about the child labor. Diego felt physically sick as the implications sank in. He knew about Lucia. He knew she was Dr. Morales' daughter. There's more. Ricardo has been receiving reports on Lucia's situation through Hernandez. He's known where she was this whole time. The betrayal was staggering. While Diego had been desperately trying to help Lucia, his own uncle had been profiting from her suffering, and worse, had known exactly who she was and done nothing to help her. Diego returned to the interview room, where Lucia was just finishing her testimony. As they prepared to leave, Agent Martinez pulled him aside. "Mr. Mendoza, Lucia's testimony is going to break this case wide open, but I need you to know that the investigation is going to touch some very wealthy and powerful people. Are you prepared for that? Whatever it takes to protect Lucia and bring the people responsible to justice," Diego said firmly. But as they drove home, Diego wrestled with how to tell Isabella that someone they had trusted and loved had betrayed them in the worst possible way, and wondered what other secrets Ricardo might be hiding and how far he would go to protect himself once he realized that Lucia was now beyond his reach. That night, as Diego tucked both girls into Isabella's bed, Lucia looked at him with those wise, dark eyes. "Daddy Diego, the man I told the FBI lady about, he's someone you know, isn't he?" Diego hesitated, then decided Lucia deserved the truth. "Yes, sweetheart, he's my uncle, but what he did was very wrong, and he's going to have to face the consequences." "I'm sorry," Lucia whispered. "I'm sorry that helping me is causing problems for your family." Isabella sat up indignantly. "Lucia, you are our family, and we protect our family no matter what." Diego kissed both girls goodnight, his heart heavy with the knowledge that the hardest part of their journey was still ahead. Ricardo Mendoza wasn't a man who would fall quietly, and Diego had the feeling that the battle for Lucia's future was about to become a war that would test everything he believed about family, loyalty, and justice. The midnight threat. The call came at midnight, waking Diego from restless sleep. Ricardo Mendoza's voice was cold and controlled, nothing like the warm, paternal tone Diego remembered from his childhood. "Diego, we need to talk immediately." "Uncle Ricardo, it's midnight. Whatever this is about can wait until morning." "No, it cannot wait. You've made a serious mistake taking in that Morales girl, and you're going to fix it before this situation destroys everything our family has built." Diego felt his anger rising. "Lucia isn't a mistake. She's my daughter now, and I won't abandon her. That girl is a witness to activities that could implicate Mendoza Industries in federal crimes. If she continues cooperating with the FBI, it could bring down the entire company." "Good," Diego said flatly. "If the company profited from child abuse and theft, then it deserves to be brought down." There was a long pause before Ricardo spoke again, his voice now carrying an unmistakable threat. "Diego, you have 24 hours to return that girl to state custody. If you don't, I'll be forced to take more direct action to protect our family's interests." The line went dead, leaving Diego staring at his phone in disbelief. His uncle, the man who had raised him after his parents' death, who had taught him everything about business and life, was threatening him over Lucia. Diego immediately called Margarita Chen, Detective Torres, and Agent Martinez, setting up emergency meetings for the next morning. Then he went to check on the girls, finding them both awake in Isabella's bed. "Daddy Diego, who was on the phone?" Lucia asked quietly. "You sounded upset." Diego sat on the edge of the bed, weighing his words carefully. "Girls, we need to talk about something important. Some people don't want Lucia to stay with us, and they might try to scare us or cause trouble." Isabella sat up straight, her jaw set with determination that reminded him painfully of Clara. "What kind of trouble?" "I don't know yet, but I want you both to promise me that you won't go anywhere without me or our security team. And if anyone at all, tries to talk to you about Lucia or asks you to go somewhere, you say no and call me immediately." "Are we in danger?" Lucia asked, her voice small but steady. "I won't let anything happen to either of you," Diego said firmly. "I promise you that." The next morning, Diego's worst fears were confirmed when Margarita Chen arrived with disturbing news. "Diego, Ricardo has filed a motion claiming that you're mentally unfit to adopt Lucia due to unresolved grief over Clara's death. He's provided testimony from family friends, claiming that you've been making erratic decisions since Clara died." "That's insane. I've never been clearer about anything in my life." "There's more. He's also claiming that Isabella is being negatively affected by Lucia's presence, that she's becoming withdrawn and showing signs of psychological distress." Diego felt his world spinning out of control. "He's trying to use Isabella against me. He's also hired a private security firm. Officially, it's to protect Mendoza Industries' assets during the FBI investigation. Unofficially, he's planning something." Agent Martinez arrived an hour later with equally troubling news. "Mr. Mendoza, we've intercepted communications suggesting that Ricardo Mendoza is planning to remove Lucia from your custody using private contractors. Essentially a kidnapping disguised as a legal intervention." "When?" "Soon. Within the next 48 hours, we believe." Diego felt his protective instincts surge. "What can we do?" "We can provide federal protection for Lucia as a key witness, but it would mean moving her to a safe house until trial. She might not be able to see you or Isabella for weeks, possibly months." Diego's heart broke at the thought of separating Lucia from Isabella again, especially when they were just beginning to heal together. "There's another option," Agent Martinez continued. "We could set up a controlled situation where Ricardo attempts to take Lucia, allowing us to arrest him in the act. But it would put Lucia at risk, and we'd need her cooperation." That night, Diego gathered both girls in his study and explained the situation as gently as he could. Lucia listened carefully, then surprised everyone with her response. "I want to help catch him," she said firmly. "My mommy always said that when bad people hurt children, good people have to stop them. If I can help stop your uncle from hurting other kids, then I want to do it." Isabella grabbed Lucia's hand. "If Lucia does this, I want to help too." "Absolutely not," Diego said immediately. "I won't put either of you in danger." "Daddy Diego," Lucia said, using the name that had become precious to all of them. "I've been running from scary people my whole life, but now I have a family that protects me. I'm not afraid anymore." Diego looked at both girls, Lucia with her quiet courage and Isabella with her fierce loyalty, and realized they were braver than he had ever been. "If we do this," he said slowly, "we do it together as a family." Outside in the hallway, unnoticed by any of them, a small listening device transmitted every word of their conversation to a van parked 3 blocks away, where Ricardo Mendoza sat listening with cold calculation. The trap was set, but the question remained: who was really the hunter and who was the prey? The trap. The plan was set for Saturday afternoon in Central Park, a location that would seem natural for a family outing while providing the FBI with multiple vantage points and escape routes. Diego, Isabella, and Lucia would be having a picnic near the Bethesda fountain, acting as normal as possible while federal agents positioned themselves throughout the area. Lucia had been remarkably calm during the briefings, her small hand steady in Diego's as Agent Martinez explained what might happen. Isabella, however, was nervous energy personified, asking a dozen questions about every detail. What if Uncle Ricardo brings guns? What if he hurts Lucia? What if something goes wrong? Isabella rapid-fired her concerns. "Sweetheart, there are going to be 20 FBI agents watching us," Diego reassured her. "Nothing is going to happen to Lucia." "I know," Lucia said quietly, looking at her mother's photograph that she still carried everywhere. "My mommy is watching over me too. I can feel her." As they spread their blanket on the grass that beautiful Saturday morning, Diego marveled at how normal everything seemed. Families surrounded them, children played on the nearby playground, joggers passed on the paths. It was impossible to believe that somewhere in this peaceful scene, a man Diego had loved like a father was planning to destroy everything they had built together. At exactly 2 p.m., Ricardo Mendoza appeared, but he wasn't alone. He brought with him 2 men in expensive suits who looked more like corporate lawyers than the private security agents Diego had expected. Behind them, almost as an afterthought, walked Janet Rodriguez from Child Protective Services, looking uncomfortable and out of place. "Hello, Diego," Ricardo said, his voice carrying the same warmth it always had, as if nothing had changed between them. "Girls." Isabella moved protectively closer to Lucia, who had gone very still but showed no signs of fear. "Uncle Ricardo," Diego said, standing slowly. "I didn't expect to see you here." "I'm sure you didn't. Diego, I've come to collect Lucia. Ms. Rodriguez has the appropriate documentation for her immediate return to state custody." Janet Rodriguez stepped forward reluctantly, pulling out a manila folder. "Mr. Mendoza, I'm sorry, but new evidence has come to light regarding Lucia's placement. We need to remove her from your home, pending a full investigation." "What new evidence?" Diego asked, though he already knew this had all been orchestrated by Ricardo. "Evidence suggesting that you've been coaching Lucia to lie about her experiences in foster care," Ricardo said smoothly. "Evidence that you've been using her trauma to advance your own agenda against legitimate businesses." Lucia stood up from the blanket, her small figure somehow commanding attention from every adult present. "That's not true," she said clearly, her voice carrying across the open space. "Daddy Diego never told me to lie about anything. Everything I said about the Hernandez house was true." "Lucia, sweetheart," Ricardo said, his voice dripping with false kindness. "Children sometimes remember things differently than how they really happened. Adults need to sort this out properly." I remember everything exactly, Lucia said, and Diego marveled at the strength in her voice. I remember you coming to the house. I remember you giving Mr. Hernandez money for the boxes we made in the basement. And I remember you asking about me specifically. Ricardo's facade cracked slightly. You're mistaken, child. No, I'm not. Lucia continued, taking out her mother's photograph. You told Mr. Hernandez that I looked just like my mommy. You said my mommy was Dr. Elena Morales and that she had helped your family once. You said you were sorry she died. The color drained from Ricardo's face as he realized Lucia remembered far more than he had anticipated. You knew who I was the whole time, Lucia continued, her voice growing stronger. You knew I was the daughter of the doctor who saved Isabella's mommy. But instead of helping me, you let me stay in that terrible place because it was good for your business. Diego felt a surge of pride and heartbreak as he watched this 8-year-old girl stand up to a man who had terrorized him. But then Lucia said something that changed everything. But I know something else too, she continued, looking directly at Ricardo. I know you were at the hospital the night my mommy died. Ricardo went completely still. What are you talking about? The nurse told me that a man came looking for my mommy's patient files the night of the accident. She said he claimed to be family, but that he went through all her records about a little girl with cancer. Diego felt the pieces clicking together with horrible clarity. You were looking for information about Clara, he said, his voice barely a whisper. You wanted to know about her treatment, her condition. Diego, you don't understand, Ricardo began. You were already planning this, Diego continued, his voice growing stronger. Even before Clara died, you were setting up the electronics scheme. You knew that Dr. Morales' operation gave us extra time with Clara, and you were looking for ways to use that information. Lucia nodded solemnly. My mommy's friend at the hospital told me the man took copies of files he wasn't supposed to have. She said she always wondered if someone was planning to hurt my mommy because she knew too much about something. The implication hung in the air like thunder. Ricardo hadn't just exploited Lucia after her mother's death. He had been investigating Dr. Morales before the accident, possibly contributing to the circumstances that led to her death. You killed her, Diego said, the words coming out as a hoarse whisper. That's absurd, Ricardo said, but his hands were shaking now. Elena Morales died in a car accident. I had nothing to do with... You had her working impossible hours, Diego interrupted, his voice gaining power. You made sure she was exhausted, stressed, overworked. You knew she would eventually make a mistake. Agent Martinez stepped out from behind a nearby tree, her badge clearly visible. Ricardo Mendoza, you're under arrest for conspiracy, racketeering, child endangerment, and conspiracy to commit murder. As the handcuffs clicked around Ricardo's wrists, he looked at Diego with something that might have been regret. I was trying to protect the family business, Diego. Everything I did was for the family. Lucia is my family, Diego said firmly. Isabella is my family. You were just a man who forgot what family really means. Jar of the ending. 3 months later, Diego stood in the same courthouse where he had once felt powerless against bureaucracy, watching as Judge Patricia Moreno, unrelated to Lucia's mother but a woman who understood the importance of family, finalized Lucia's adoption. By the power vested in me by the state of New York, Judge Moreno said with a smile, I hereby declare that Lucia Elena Morales Mendoza is now the legal daughter of Diego Mendoza and the legal sister of Isabella Mendoza. Lucia's new middle name honored her mother, while her new last name gave her the family she had always deserved. That night, as they sat together in the rooftop garden where this whole journey had begun, Lucia looked up at the stars and spoke to her mother one last time. Mommy, I found them. I found the brave girl and her daddy just like you said I would. And now we're a family, and we're going to take care of each other forever. Isabella squeezed her sister's hand. Your mommy and my mommy are probably friends up there, watching over us together. Diego drew both girls close, finally understanding that the greatest inheritance he could give them wasn't money or status or security. It was the knowledge that families are built not by blood or law, but by love, courage, and the willingness to fight for each other, no matter what. "I love you both," he whispered into the night air, knowing that Clara and Dr. Elena Morales were indeed watching over them, proud of the family their daughters had chosen to become. And in that moment, under the stars that had guided them to each other, Diego, Isabella, and Lucia were exactly where they belonged, together at last, forever. Did you enjoy this emotional story? If it touched you as much as it did me, please give it a like. Subscribe to the channel for more stories that will touch your heart. Hit the bell to never miss any. Tell me in the comments, do you believe love transcends death? Have you had any unexplainable experiences with loved ones who passed away? I want to hear your stories. And don't forget to share this video with that special person who needs to believe in miracles and second chances. Until the next story, a heartfelt hug.